Welcome back, future devs. Just kidding. Welcome back, future devs, to the hardest and scariest video that will be in this series. I was actually kind of worried about doing this one because this is a struggle for everybody. It is good shapes versus bad shapes, and what does that even mean? I don't know what that means, so you're about to watch me struggle for the next 20 minutes trying to describe to you what I think good shapes are and some tools that we can use to bring those out quicker. We've talked about composition and thumbnailing with that. The same thing when you do good shapes, thumbnailing. It is the best way to get a lot of information on paper as quickly as possible. When you are thumbnailing, there's pretty much no risk. Everything's throwaway. This is something I really had to get in my head before I really started exploring design. If you're worried about cramping up, if you're worried about each thumbnail looking really good and people maybe walking by look at your sketchbook and you're nervous about it, this is something you have to somehow find a way to stop. You have to be totally okay with thinking you're the shittiest artist on planet Earth, and you have to just almost be the way I did it was I was like, I don't care what people think, because one day I'm gonna be so good, like you'll see. And of course I'm bad right now. Like this is the road. Like I accepted the road to getting good, and that's when you can start getting some mileage with your art, and that's when you can really start to just like not care about anything and just draw, 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 and that's when you learn. Because I think good shapes and good design comes from mileage. There's really no other way around it. Um, but there are quite a few tricks and tips that you can look out for that are helpful when thinking about design. So without further ado, I will get right into some reference I pulled, which I think will help spark a good idea of what good shapes are, you know. And the best way I like to go about it is, I think, okay, I've been given an assignment. Like, you wouldn't see this image. I've been given an assignment to draw this cool rocky canyon. And in this rocky canyon, there's this, there's a sword at the top of this like cool rock in the middle of this canyon. So your task is to design what that cool rock would look like leading up to this awesome sword. Anytime I look at art that I could like come up with a narrative for it, I go, oh God, would I have ever designed these incredible shapes? And that's when you realize that, because anytime I used to look at art, I go, yeah, that's cool, like I could do that. But it's only because you looked at these designs that you go, well, yeah, that's the obvious cool thing you would do, but would you have done these designs? Um, so that's a nice way to like squeeze more information out of art than you normally would. I'm actually going to turn these black and white. So when designing anything, the best thing to do is to divide your workload up. It's hard enough to be thinking about color. It's hard enough to be thinking about the subshapes inside of the larger grand shape. So the first thing you want to do is create silhouettes. And by silhouettes, I mean exactly what you're looking at right here. Um, this is the bread and butter of good design. This is what gets you started to think about your forms in their most basic shape. The best way it was described to me was when I heard about people developing video games. When you're fighting a character and he's off in the distance, or he or she's off in the distance, you want to be able to identify that character quickly. When you're watching a animated film or any kind of film, when a character comes into the room, you don't ever want to be confused about who that person is. And that all comes from very basic shape language to, is the boss big and fat? Is the villain, tall and skinny? And that obviously all, well, not obviously, that comes down to the narrative you're trying to say about this character, whether they're tall and skinny and more menacing, or big and blocky and overwhelming, and what is the element of what is the characteristics you're trying to convey of that character, and that will definitely feed into your thumbnailing, which is just the silhouette, and then everything else lives in that silhouette. You don't have to think about anything else, where the buttons are on their shirt, if they're even wearing a shirt. Just think about the essence and the the mood and the emotion you're trying to convey with that. And you can see how a lot of these really have different feels to them. This one is really uneasy right here. Let me get red so you guys can see what I'm doing. This is really uneasy. This one slightly uneasy as well. It's falling over compared to things like this where they're really grounded, you know. And depending on the narrative of the scene and the thing you're trying to say in that moment, you know, is this going to be a struggle of a climb to get that sword at the very top? You know, is this kind of like a relief and the person's found the sword, so, you know, maybe it's stepped up, so it looks like it's just going to be an easy walk to the top. This is the exploration of design in its most basic form. So when you sit down, you've had a briefing with a client, or you have an idea, the first thing you do is you start with a piece of paper, and you fearlessly, and that's the really hard thing to do, you fearlessly go in to making designs. I think the biggest thing for designing is to have a narrative going on in your head. So let's say I'm thinking about, I want this menacing centerpiece of a mountain. And so as I'm drawing, I'm going, okay, like I'm letting the pen hit the page first before I even think of anything. And I let that talk to me, and then I kind of change the narrative on the pen. So it's a back and forth. The pen strikes the page. I go, oh, that could be like, oh, that's very stabby. Okay, maybe there's like, yeah, this thing has really stabby things. So, and I abandon it. I move on. So now I'm like, okay, stabby. What would a stabby environment or like main mountain look like? Maybe it's got like this wedge where people could fall into, and it's just very treacherous. That works. I kind of like the treacherous thing where like you really feel like you could fall into things. So maybe it's big spikes like this, and I'm having these like really nerdy conversations with myself, and like maybe there's, you know, I always tell people you got to get into that voice, you gotta be like, and then there's like these cool little spikes at the bottom here. And before you know it, you're creating these informed decisions, but it's always just kind of based off of letting the pen or the marker hit the page and letting that influence you. And you're like, okay, maybe if you fall completely off the cliff, there's like these pokies down below, and it's really just like this thing's just impossible to climb. Like, speaking of impossible to climb, like imagine there was just like these cliffs like this, and like there's like literally no lips to it, just literally like nothing to grab onto, just completely flat surfaces. Or I don't know, like I just had a change of thought. Maybe the spikes are pointing down. Like, how are you gonna even climb this thing? It's completely like pushing back at anybody that ever want to climb it. And before you know it, you've made a page of 40 thumbnails. And again, I don't care about any of this. The goal of a thumbnail is to get one design, one design, one. That's it. You do 40 shitty designs because you want one design. And if there's one thing I know, if you do 5 ideas, there's going to be a hierarchy. There's no way every single one of those designs were exactly the same level of cool. Impossible. So it's reasonable to think that if you're going to do 30 designs, 50 designs, you're going to have a cream of the crop. You know, you're going to have your isolated 3 that are way cooler. And what's awesome is you can brush away the other ones. I don't because I am crazy and I'm always afraid to delete things. I will make a new layer, and I just cross out the ones I don't like, just so I can always reference them if it ever, and I keep the ones I do like. What I'll do, I'll also duplicate the layer with the ones with all of them, and I delete. So now I actually have a layer with just my favorite ones. Nothing's destructive. I still have my old ones. So you got to realize that nothing is permanent. Nothing is destructive. No one cares what your thumbnails are. The idea is that at the end of the day, it took me 5 minutes while talking to you guys to come up with these 4 ideas, because what people are going to see on ArtStation is a finished, polished painting that you spent 20 hours on. And it's so important to get that established root design down really, really well. And it is so little work in comparison to trying to solve it when it's 20 hours in and the design doesn't work. And now you're trying to fix this thing with all the rendering on it, and it's just a mess and nothing's lined up. You design early, you make all of your mistakes. Your goal is to literally make bullshit mistakes and just grind out all your generic ideas until the conversation starts to get a little bit more creative, and you're like, oh, what if these things? And oh man, like I'm just getting ideas when I make that voice. It's so funny. And like maybe it's like almost like a crescent moon thing, and you know, they have these like juxtaposing little like big to small, and you have this cool like dance between these two. That's the narrative you should have. You got to get really nerdy. You got to do the voice, and just make a bunch of mistakes as quickly as possible and fill up a page. I'm talking 40 and 50. Like I wouldn't say I'm a veteran artist, but I'm deep in the industry, and every time I'm doing something that I really care about, I am doing 40 thumbnails. But they're like 2 minutes a piece, so it's like an hour or two of work to supplement to strengthen the next 30 hours you're about to put into rendering a painting. It's so worth it. And if you don't believe me now, after about 30 paintings and realizing they suck from a base core, you'll start to go, you know, thumbnails aren't a bad idea. So either do it now and take my word for it, or suffer for a really long time and let me know what you think about that approach. So moving on, I want to we're already halfway into this video. I want to quickly go over some design philosophy that can help you quickly get better thumbnails, so you're at least off to a good start. I covered silhouettes. Silhouettes are the basis of creating a design without having to think about too much of what's going on the inside, right? So I'm creating this helmet. I don't have to worry about how it's rendered. I don't have to know what materials are built into it. All I'm trying to do is create a good shape. Like if you look at this, that's honestly like the most horrible thing I've ever drawn. Like this is the point of a thumbnail. But then I move on, and your brain almost starts to turn on, and things start to happen. I think my helmet is facing this way, like that'd be the visor or something, and I just move on. Some tricks that I think are just general good design. I'll go over like four of the core ideas. The first one is noise, like having areas of rest and areas of noise. So what I mean by that is like, this is one kind of solid big shape, right? If you're going to add small details, add them sparingly and don't get too crazy. Like I kind of just repeated this one over here, but you don't have to, I see designs sometimes where a person will, you know, they'll do like the base helmet or whatever, and then they just are like, oh, and then I want like these knobs all over it, and before you know it, what happens is the knobs, they lose value. They lose value because there's too many of them, and it turns into almost a competition where nothing wins the show because everything's fighting for dominance. So it's much better when you're designing to have your base shape and then just sprinkle in here and there a few well balanced, it's just about balance, a few balanced details. If you were to get into the sub shapes of this thing, you know, the same thing would apply. Like you're not going to be putting 1,000 circles on the side of this helmet, right? Think a little bit more, a little cleaner, I guess. Like really, everything should have its purpose, and you want to just drive things so you're not just cluttering every surface you can find. It's really attractive to have nice flowing areas of rest versus a space of complexity. It gives something for, it's like, again, like how I talk about rhythm in art. It's the song of the piece. You know, a song goes from the beginning really soft, and then it escalates into, you know, the epic middle of the song, and then it tapers off to the end. Art is the exact same way. You want to have, it can't, if you do circles everywhere. It's just samey. It's like the song started on just like a constant beat and nothing changed throughout the whole song. It's a super boring song. It's the same thing with design. So make sure you're really making sure you give breathing room for nice open areas, and then you can have pockets of complexity where the design just gets really hectic, and you can just go nuts with that space, and then trim it out with some nice smooth details. Um, another really good rule of thumb to think about is the shapes in general. When you're designing, think about the relationship between the shapes. So we'll say this is one, design theory one. Second is to think about the relationship between the shapes. So if you have let's say this is my big shape. You basically want to have a big, medium, and a small shape. And those are really quite balanced for you. If you have a big shape, you don't want your medium shape to be this, and your small shape to be this. Again, it's too samey. There's not enough contrast, and remember there's a world of contrast, not just light and dark. There's not enough contrast going on. The same goes as if this was your medium and that was your small. You can get away with that because there's definitely contrast between the two, but it's good to really think about what you want to say and balance what you're trying to say. So your middle could be like that, and then your details could be so your primary, secondary, and tertiary shapes essentially. And really just make sure that balance is thought of. If you're doing some crawling creature or something, you wouldn't make its legs this big. Well, you shouldn't make its legs this big because they're very competitive with the main shape. It's much more important to think of the shapes in terms of like a much broader contrast to the design. Its eyes could be, something really fun like that. You could have a nice little shell right there or something. That's what's going to start creating the drama in your shapes. When I was designing early in my career, I used to really think about when I design. Actually, that's so. No, this is a continuation of that. So think of like your 1, 2, 3 punch for shapes. I'll do this. I'll design a thing so it's simple to complex. This is big, medium to small, and kind of a continuation onto this. When you're thinking about design, think about weight distribution. So is this character going to be top heavy? Is this character going to be bottom heavy? Is the character going to have this shape, this shape? You can really start to think. You don't have to draw these shapes. What I actually used to do, because it's really hard for me to remember these shapes, I would just draw a bunch of scenarios. Maybe my character is this shape, like in an essence. Like I would just draw out like the range of things I can explore within a character. I'm not saying that the character has to be a triangle at all. The character could honestly look, a lot like this. Like this is the shape of the character, right? Another little crab dude. Well, no, maybe I want the crab dude to be more like this, with these kind of pokey things, and he walks from this center. So I'm using this distribution of weight to explore design, and you can do a wide page of these things. You can have this to this. There's not really a fixed limitation on this. You can have this and this, and maybe see something that's balanced. You want to think about balance too. It still comes down to this, right? I'm still doing my big shape, my little shape, and then my medium shape. But like, what kind of character is that? Like, I can reference that to design a guy, and maybe he has an interesting hat on his head, but like, this is horrible. start just designing it out. I think he should probably have wider legs. I don't have to follow this 100%. It just gets me off to a base that's really, it's really pushing my thoughts of how to express weight and push weight around. And I know this is a lot to try to consider. At the end of the day, I want to just see you guys slamming down shapes on the page, thinking about the essence of my sweet character who's very innocent and fun, or the villainous, mean, you know, menacing character who just, you know, is just dominating in this scenario. And this goes for rocks. It doesn't have to be for characters. This goes for, you know, props. This goes for swords. This goes for everything. Like, this sword could be the elegant elf sword or the dominating orc sword or something. And it all applies to thinking about, again, also the psychology of shapes. You know, pokey to round, heavy, weighted at the base. Does it feel solid and the foundation of it, or does it feel like it's going to tip over? Those are generally the things that should be flowing through your head. Yeah, that's pretty much it. If you take this method and run with it, you come up with a design, come up with an idea, and you just drain it. You basically just push it as far as you can. I don't think, actually, for a really nice flow to think about all of this, absolutely deploy these things the entire time you're drawing, big, medium, and small. Think of a night, and then make sure the balance of them is appropriate. Don't fill up, and remember, you can break rules. Like, I would love to get into how, like, in a way you could totally break this, but these are your two fundamentals right here. Think of your balance of shapes in terms of scale, and think of how you pepper them into the design. And then secondly, if you're feeling like all of your designs are starting to turn to the same character, it's just like this lame variation, do a little drawing like this up here of these. Do an experiment of how many variations you can create out of blocks, to just have a reference point to look at. You can have, it doesn't have to be circles. Like, here's blocks. Like, how about block, 2 blocks? Like this, what this does is now you're not even thinking about what the character is or anything. You're just thinking about what is design, what is a dance and a contrast between, you know, one shape to the next. How does that create flow? How does that create energy? Like, here's just 2 triangles sitting next to each other. Like, this could be an awesome character base right here. Like, it's almost an hourglass shape. You know, maybe. And don't get too crazy with it, I guess. Think about the fundamentals. That this kind of spurs something like this to me. Like, really cool shape. You can flip that on its head. I'm not designing anything. You're playing graphic design. Oh, that's what I forgot to say. This stage is plain graphic designer, and if you're not quite sure what that means, like, look up what graphic design is. Look up the philosophy to graphic design is. It is the stripping of all noise. It is just finding the essence of the design, and then from there is when you can start to draw in your subshapes and start to create collars and, you know, placement of face. And there's a whole another level of like, you take that same philosophy and you shrink it down to one level, and now you're designing eyes and armor on top of these things. But if you want to have the strongest designs from the start, think fundamentally, think very rudimentary, and build off of that, and do a ton of thumbnails. And I'm telling you, I mean, do an experiment. Do one design and call it your best and take it to finish, and then do another one where you do 40 and pick your favorite 3 and push those for 5 more minutes each, and then pick your favorite one and see what that design looks like, and tell me how happy you are. Oh, actually, really quickly, I didn't show any of the designs here, so I'll quickly just go through and just, like, we can look at them and gawk at what I consider really good design. Yep, incredible shapes. This is actually really interesting. This person, this covers a little bit of, like, what types of shapes are you using? Tons of triangles in this, right? Like, a lot of these are made out of just triangles. Like, these are like very thummy looking shapes. They look like almost fingers, but the shadows break down into triangles. These are triangles like all over. So you could have circular design where everything in your design is built around the circle. But this is like this is a kind of like after you've done a thumbnail, these are your sub shapes you can think about. Oh my God, is this exactly what they're saying? Yeah, that's kind of crazy. Yeah, triangles, circles, and squares for creating these sub shapes in your designs. But get comfortable making black and white thumbnails because this stuff lives within that design. But it's not a bad idea to think about, is this a triangle character? Is this a circle character? And that's very fundamental still. Let's see what we have here. A nice reduction of trees. Like, not everything has to look like hyper realistic. Like, this is such a good simplification of design, and you could actually push this fast further and create a little bit more realistic design. But from this foundation, it would be much more attractive than just looking at basic like real trees and trying to mimic them. Again, incredible design. Like you don't have to play by any rules. Like, these wings were designed just to look cool. We don't know how they're attached. Like, you can kind of figure that out later. Thumbnails don't have to really have function. You're just exploring design right now. Um, I'm blowing through these really quick because I was about to let you guys go. Uh, these trees, like, really, again, look at this. This is perfect. So you have your main shape. It's huge, right? This is your main shape. This is your secondary shape. It's very planted. And then beautiful tertiary shapes. Like, really awesome. Main shape, secondary shape, tertiary shapes. So there's a great balance to that. And then you design within that space. Taking it to characters, you know, really well thought out. Like, you have, let's see if I can explore some of this. You have, you know, very large shapes everywhere. Big, 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 and then broken up, and then just peppered with details, because those details would look horrible if the whole thing was covered with rivets, you know. Last one, yeah, really nice design. This is shape language, but this is like flow of line, you know, and this is like what you'll get into once you start to really understand silhouettes. You know, just getting a nice balance between things, making sure spacing, things can breathe, you know, things aren't crammed up awkwardly next to each other. There's no tangents. Tangents are like your worst enemy as a young artist. Make sure everything can breathe, everything has flow, and looks intentional. There's nothing that's like accidentally cramming in this stuff, and it's mileage. You guys are gonna suffer with this for a while, but be aware that these things exist. Tangents are everywhere. You want to make sure all of your art is just very graphic design. Look at graphic design. Look at how much flow there is to things. Nothing is awkwardly like falling apart or too small or too big. Yeah, now I will end the video. Thanks for watching, guys. I will see you in the next one. Peace.